The Phaedo is a Platonic dialogue that relates the conversation between Socrates and his friends on the day of his execution. Given the circumstances, the conversation naturally turns to questions concerning death, the soul, and the afterlife. The friends of Socrates are sad about his impending death, but Socrates tells them that he is cheerful at the thought of death, and he promises to tell them why. I desire to prove to you that the real philosopher has reason to be of good cheer when he is about to die, and that after death he may hope to obtain the greatest good in the other world. Socrates explains that man can only attain wisdom after death, for it is only then that the mind is liberated from the distractions of the body. The body is a source of endless trouble to us by reason of the mere requirement of food, and is liable also to diseases which overtake and impede us in the search after true being. It fills us full of loves and lusts and fears and fancies of all kinds, and endless foolery, and in fact, as men say, takes away from us the power of thinking at all. The soul in herself must behold things in themselves, and only then we shall attain the wisdom which we desire, not while we live, but after death. Despite Socrates' confidence, some of his friends are not convinced that the soul will survive the death of the body. They are fearful that when the body dies, so too will the soul. To dispel their fears, Socrates presents 4 arguments: the Cyclical Argument, the Theory of Recollection, the Affinity Argument, and the Argument from the Form of Life. The Cyclical Argument asserts that contraries are generated from their contraries. For example, sleeping is the contrary of waking and vice versa. The state of sleeping is generated from the state of waking and vice versa. So too with all other contraries. Swiftness is generated from slowness, bigness from littleness, etc. Life is the contrary of death, and therefore life is generated from death just as death is generated from life. Socrates concludes that if generation were in a straight line only, and there were no compensation or circle in nature, no turn or return of elements into their opposites, then you know that all things would at last have the same form and pass into the same state, and there would be no more generation of them. If all things which partook of life were to die, and after they were dead remained in the form of death, and did not come to life again, all would at last die, and nothing would be alive. The Theory of Recollection claims that we have knowledge of abstract ideas such as beauty, equality, and justice, because we became acquainted with them in a former life. To clarify this argument, let us consider equality. Absolute equality does not exist in this universe. 2 logs might be very similar in length, but they are not equal. Perfect circles, squares, and triangles do not exist either. Whence comes our knowledge of absolute equality in geometric figures, then, if we have never encountered them in this world? Socrates answers that we encountered them before our birth in the realm of the forms. This realization leads us to conclude that our soul must have existed before our birth. The Affinity Argument claims that the soul bears an affinity to the invisible, the immortal, and the indissoluble, while the body exhibits an affinity to the visible, the mortal, and the dissoluble. Socrates first remarks that the forms, such as beauty, equality, and justice, are invisible and immutable. The soul likewise is invisible and immutable. The body, on the other hand, is visible and subject to change. Finally, the soul resembles the divine because the soul commands the body, not vice versa. Thus, Socrates concludes that because the soul bears an affinity to the eternal forms and the divine gods, the soul must also be immortal. The argument from the form of life claims that the soul is immortal because the soul is the form of life, or the cause of life. Just as things are beautiful in so much as they partake in the form of beauty, so too are things alive in so much as they partake in the form of life. In other words, things that are alive possess a soul. Just as fire, the bringer of heat, can never be cold, and just as snow, the bringer of cold, can never be hot, so too the soul, the bringer of life, can never be dead. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Farewell.